It's hard to talk about the fall of theatrical 2D animation in Western culture without mentioning Disney. A lot of people have expressed an interest, or at least a curiosity, about why 2D animation is no longer around in film, and I can find no better studio to place the blame at the feet of than Disney. Disney controls so much and has so much influence over not just a bunch of companies and popular IPs, but the culture as well. Not just the culture of America, but the world. Disney has spread its tentacles to almost every country on the planet, and it brings with it its values and moral prescriptions about how humans should act in a society. And its main vehicle to disseminate this is through its animated movies. One thing I want to avoid in this video right off the bat is commenting on the quality of a certain animated film or another animated film. Quality is subjective. Taste is subjective, and while we can look at the review aggregators or general consensus to gauge how a specific film was received by the masses, I believe that just asking animated films to be better is a waste of time. Rather, we are looking at this situation from the conclusion and basing our thoughts on it solely on the end result itself. This is a very narrow way of analyzing media, as it ignores the cultural zeitgeist that spawned the piece of media in the first place. As a child of the 90s, I think it goes without saying that Disney movies, especially those created during the so-called Disney Renaissance, were very close to my heart and influenced my way of looking at the world from a young age. These films were surprisingly progressive compared to Disney films in the Golden Age, although they can hardly be called that now. And when I say progressive, I'm not talking about human culture, but rather the message and values of the Disney Corporation. You see, Disney as a company has always had a strong stranglehold on controlling the dialogue of mainstream thought surrounding children's entertainment. What values should we be teaching our kids? And isn't it strange that a single company has such a monopoly on what kids are allowed to see and learn from their screens? Other companies like DreamWorks and Illumination have sprouted out and gained a foothold in this dialogue in recent years, but Disney is older than them, much older than them, in fact, by a mile. And it is because of this legacy that Disney has not just control over the dialogue of the modern generation, but since the 1930s. Indeed, it can be traced back to Disney's explosion of popularity with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, where Disney became much less about the artistic vision of a few men, solely from a male perspective, and more about growing a company so huge that it could and would dominate white Christian conservative culture for the next century. This is the reason you won't see any gay lead characters in a Disney movie, or a black character in a main role like Princess Tiana will spend most of the film as a frog, where she doesn't have to be showing her blackness all the time to sensitive white folks. It is a reality of this situation which makes accusations of Disney becoming woke, so frustrating and nonsensical. Of course, Disney does things because of money. Every corporation exists solely to increase its profit margins. But Disney putting throwaway gay characters in the background of their movies, then patting themselves on the back for being progressive, is nothing but a PR stunt. The LGBT plus community recognizes this, and this is why they are so harshly critical of Disney doing this. This can hardly be called representation if the thing you are representing can be easily edited out of the movie and not affect the overall movie itself, which Disney often does for foreign countries who are much more outwardly discriminatory than our mainstream popular culture. The overwhelming majority of Disney main characters have been white, and they never question religion or specifically Christianity. When they adapted The Hunchback of Notre Dame, they made damn sure that the villain Frollo was merely a judge acting on his own sexism and racism, and not the friendly archdeacon who not only saves Quasimodo as a baby, but also offers sanctuary in the cathedral to Esmeralda. This differs wildly from the book, where Frollo was the archdeacon, and Victor Hugo wrote the character as a criticism of Catholicism in France at that time period. And largely, to this day and in the foreseeable future, Disney will not question religion or talk leftist politics besides the slight nod to social issues that wouldn't count as good representation even the most favorable of lenses. Do you see why it's so ridiculous to call Disney woke now? It's very easy to look at the last 2D animated films Disney came out with and blame those movies solely for the reason Disney abandoned 2D animation. After all, the moviegoers voted with their wallets. The audiences made themselves heard loud and clear. We would rather see Shrek and Kung Fu Panda than Treasure Planet or Princess and the Frog. The whole let audiences vote with their wallets idea has been kicked around since the idea of free market capitalism even existed, and it is to this day one of the most childish, uncritical, and simplistic arguments one could make about the situation. It's the same as calling Disney woke. The audience member is nothing but a pawn. They have no power and no say when it comes to what these movies will be about or how they will be made. That is all up to the people in suits, who the filmmakers answer to. Blaming an audience for paying money to see dumb movies is leveling criticism at the wrong target, because it's easy to just write off most people as just stupid and call it a day. It requires no introspection, no deeper analysis of generational trends or structural critique. Just say people are stupid, and that's that. Well, if we look at exactly the selection of movies that people are given, the reality becomes clear that people don't have a choice in what they are shown. Take a movie like The Iron Giant, for example. A movie that is widely regarded as a great film and one of the best 2D kids movies ever made. But it tanked at the box office. Were audiences just tired of good stories and beautiful 2D animation? No, it's because Warner Brothers, the company that distributed The Iron Giant, absolutely shit the bed on the film's marketing. Most people didn't even know what The Iron Giant was, and if they did, they had no idea what the film was about. Hollywood is a business. If the art is good but nobody sees it, it might as well have not even existed. This is a harsh way of viewing art as a form of expression, but it is the truth that most people in Hollywood agree on, whether true or not. Lorenzo di Bonaventura, president of production at Warner Brothers, was quoted as saying after the dismal box office numbers for The Iron Giant came in, "People always say to me, why don't you make smarter family movies? The lesson is, every time you do, you get slaughtered." End quote. The failure of the higher-ups at Warner Brothers to blame everyone but themselves for the failure of The Iron Giant is nothing short of astonishing. This is the same year that Toy Story 2 came out, a film that is widely regarded as being as good, if not better, than its predecessors. It seems that when it comes to placing blame on the failures of good films, everyone except the people actually in charge for selling the products get blamed. What happened to The Iron Giant is directly comparable to what happened to Treasure Planet, Home on the Range, Princess and the Frog, and all the late era 2D Disney animated films. Animation production is a hard business. Like all films, a bunch of sweat, tears, and labor is put into producing a movie, even down to the catering. There are a lot of moving parts to consider that go into making a movie happen that most people never get to see. It is partly this headache of production that has led some people, even some animators, to claim that 3D is just easier to do than 2D, while also being more expensive somehow. I don't like this appeal to intuition. 3D looks expensive, so it must cost more. A film's budget is so contextual on the needs of the film itself. A big-budget action movie is going to require more man-hours than a movie about a bunch of people sitting in a room and talking. The same applies to animated films. Some people like to point to the technical differences between traditional and CG and say, look how easier it is to make CG. Instead of drawing the same character 1,000 times, you only have to make one CG puppet and then you're done. Glossing over the fact that this is a gross oversimplification of the 3D process, it also weakens the argument for 3D because in 2D, a character can look different from drawing to drawing, allowing much more expression frame by frame to be transferred directly from the artist's mind to the paper. Despite being capable of everything that could possibly be imagined, one of the many pitfalls in 3D animation is characters that look the same and characters that look stilted. Fluid animation just looks nicer to the eyes, and characters that are animated more realistically can actually be quite boring when put next to characters that move in a much more fluid and unrealistic way to them. Films like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and the Hotel Transylvania series try to offset this limitation, but it doesn't come off the same, at least to me. It feels cheap. It feels like 3D doing an impression of 2D rather than being its own thing. 3D has so much potential to do whatever it can think of, and yet it is stuck either trying to imitate real life or imitate what 2D movies do better. This is why I don't like the framing of 2D versus 3D. In a perfect world, both should exist. 3D is not an evolution of 2D, rather they are just different forms of art capable of their own avenues of expression. Saying 3D is better is like saying photography is better than painting. They are two completely separate avenues with different goals. There are things that a camera can do that no one, not even the most photorealistic painter in the world, can ever capture. But the great thing about painting is being able to construct a landscape of fiction to create something that looks real, but at the same time requires the hand and eye of a skilled artist that would never occur in nature, or it would be incredibly difficult to recreate in a photo. And here is where 3D really stumbles in the modern era, not by technological limitations, but by a limitation of scope. Feelings about the film aside, Pixar's The Good Dinosaur is an absolutely astounding movie in the way it is able to photorealistically render its landscapes. Even today, more than 5 years after its release, it still looks convincingly real, even to the discerning eye. And that is the problem. At what point do 3D animated films become so realistic that they are essentially live-action films? Part of the reason the Lion King remake failed so incredibly hard was because the filmmakers limited themselves to making everything look as realistic as possible, without realizing that what they came up with at the end was an incredibly boring movie that had none of the charm nor visual flair of the original. I remember seeing a close-up render of Elsa from Frozen sometime in 2014, and I can vividly remember how I could see every little detail of Elsa's dress, almost in microscopic detail. There is an aspect to making cartoon characters so immensely detailed that is technically impressive, but I remember thinking, honestly, what is the point of this? You would never see all this detail while she's moving, and the camera would have to do an extreme close-up to even appreciate all the detail put into it. And for what? Most people that will see this will probably be watching this in 1080p quality on their smartphones, if that, and it comes off as just wasted effort to me. There is nothing in the minute details of the characters' clothes or the pores of their skin, which is essential to the story. Elsa could be animated in 2D. Without all those details, and nothing about her character would be lost. So if we can't vote with our wallets, what is to be done about this? I want to see a comeback for 2D animation that isn't just limited to streaming and television. And no matter how many times I purchase a Goofy movie on every format, it's not going to change. Well, there isn't a clean solution to any big systemic issue, but I think, at least as of right now, the way to change the culture is to democratize 2D animation. 2D animation, in my opinion, will always be the format that is most accessible to everyone. 3D requires beefy computers that can render and process big projects, as well as the time to learn how 3D modeling programs work that goes against every human intuition. With 2D, you really only need a pencil, paper, and a camera. 2D animation, like all forms of art, is a form of communication. 2D needs to be more accessible, not less accessible to people. While there are 2D programs out there on computers, they are still too expensive and too complicated for the average person to learn and grasp. The way to get more people to do something is to show that anyone can do it. Maybe Disney will decide to bring back 2D one day. Maybe they won't. It doesn't really matter. What matters more is that we don't let 2D die as a form of artistic expression. An expression which, I believe, is just as beautiful and valid as the most detailed fur on Sully's ass crack. Thanks for watching.